We're excited to have you with us. My name is David Stallman. I'm the president and co-founder of both CampusSpeak and Evergreen Speakers. Today, we have Jitesh and Sam here with us to talk a little bit about what is a really big topic, AAPI month. And when we look at Asian American Pacific Islander Celebration Month, it is such a broad scope that we couldn't possibly encompass everything that could be brought in to really make this a great celebration. But we have two great people here to start a conversation and to help out in people who want to do programming and planning around this month to help out their perspective on how to do it better this year than maybe last year, and maybe even set up next year's better than this year, and to look at what this could be as a month starting celebration and not encompassing all of our cultural celebration. So with us, first, I'll introduce Jitesh Jaggi, and he's held many roles in his life, including an investment banker, a teacher and writer, and even a teacher of breakdancing. And most importantly to me, he's an amazing storyteller. And I found him through the Moth, which is a fantastic storytelling competition where he has won their highest award 3 times, back to back too, which I think is the only back to back national winner. And he is brought to schools and colleges and communities and companies all over to talk about storytelling and to talk about his culture and how those two are woven into how we all see our own lives. Loves his life in Chicago despite the cold weather, and I'm excited to have Jitesh with us. Also with us is Sam Hyun. Sam has been named one of the Boston Globe's Bostonian of the Year back in 21. He's been featured in Forbes, Good Morning America, and many other publications for his work. He's also been named 40 Under 40 by Asian Hustle Network and the National Association of Asian Pacific in Politics and Public Affairs. Sam also is the founder of a fantastic company that I hope we'll be able to talk a little bit about, where he, as an entrepreneur, is able to weave stories of culture and heritage into apparel and an identity that we get to wear. So both with us today, thank you both for being here. And I'm going to start with just a little framing because I know in terms of how I was brought up, Asian American culture was not really taught. It wasn't really brought forward very much in my upbringing. So when I first really looked into the scope of what we're talking about in terms of Asian American influences on our culture, I didn't realize that the origin, the 50 plus countries that we're talking about that encompass this third of the world and 60% of the population, and how they have influenced the American culture through these years, and how long that has been and how broad that is, was beyond what I was ever taught and whatever imagined. And so the idea that we're talking about 5, pretty distinct regions, the, Hawaiian and Polynesian islands, all Oceania, Southeast Asia and South Asia, and how they are different really than East Asia. And then Central Asia, all the stands and everything that some people aren't even used to putting in with this in terms of a cultural celebration. I had no idea. And so we're setting you two men up to represent the influence of a third of the world on the United States history and culture. And, so I hope we can realistically set expectations of that you can tell stories and you can talk about impact. And it's a grain of sand in really our beach, but it's a very distinct set of influences that have wide reach on what we as Americans all feel every day. I also love that we have the ability to talk about this. First off, it's a growing, almost doubling in the last 20 years, population of about 30 million Americans. And we have two perspectives here. One is an immigrant, someone that has come to our country, and one who grew up here, and how that sometimes that also paints the pictures differently and the influences differently. So with all that set up, and with all of that you know, walk up to what is such a big conversation, how do we make this celebration more than just sort of a sprint, a month-long sprint about food moving around the globe or music or any particular one thread? How do we make it, our individual stories fit within as a mosaic within that bigger picture? So if just Jitesh, you would start us off, and then maybe Sam, how do we make this month a start of an understanding of how that mosaic really fits together?
Yeah, that was an excellent introduction to not just us, but also the population here. David, thank you for having me as well. Um, I think you have identified, there's just the title of this talk as well. You have identified it very well that Asian Americans aren't just like limited to a month where you get to know a little bit about them and eat some food and dance some dances and listen to a different kind of music. And you're like, okay, we checked that box. Let's move on to the next one. Um, Asian Americans are a huge set in the population as well, and I think this should be treated as May should be treated as a jumping off point. I would rather prefer that people take this month as a way to inform the other 11 months of their lives here. That this is the month where I will try to attend some events, speak to as many people who represent that culture, and see what I can take with me for the rest of the year. And then revisit my understanding because this is an evolving culture, it's an evolving people. Revisit my understanding the next year when it comes around. I often will tell people, you know, a good way to just do about to go about that is go out of the house and be in company with people with Asian Americans who are doing work in the community, people who are actually putting events and they want you to be there. There are so many community organizers, event organizers who would rather prefer that people would, yeah, sure, go to Target and buy an Asian American themed product. Sure, do that as well. But also, so many community organizers, event organizers just want you to be present with them, celebrate their festivals with them, and also just be in conversation. It's not something that you can read about and tell yourself that you know a little bit. It's a lived experience that a lot of people are engaging in on a day-to-day basis. So that is the first thing that I say, like treat this month as a starting point and make sure that you're also physically present in spaces where Asian Americans are hoping to get you be involved in. 9 times out of 10, folks are more than happy that you are a part of their own culture. So that's what I would say just to begin with.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of what was already said. I really agree with. I think, May again. I love the point about May being a jumping point. I don't think that we should just be celebrating Asian Americans or AAPI community during May. I think, there's so much breadth because like throughout the year there are holidays, there are celebrations, cultural events that we all share, and so we would, as I know from community standpoint, we always love when other people join. I think the most important thing is, your intentionality. No one, I think any reasonable human being is not expecting anybody to get everything right and do it perfectly. Even, when within our own community, there's so much learning that has to be done. There's so much history. Like, for instance, I'll speak for Koreans. Like, Koreans have been around for thousands of years. There is so much to be unpacked, and even Korean American history, depending on whether you grow up on the West Coast, East Coast, down south, in the middle of the country, whether you grow, depending on your sexual orientation or your gender, like there's just so many different components that change your experience, and different regions of Korea celebrate different, like, and so to have the expectation that anybody and everybody should get everything perfectly correct, I think is an overcorrection that we experienced, especially during COVID. But I think now as things are leveling out, we're all kind of starting to exhibit a little bit more grace towards one another. And the number one thing that I think most people should focus on is if someone is showing up, are they doing it intentionally? And if they're doing it with, the right intentions, you check those two boxes off for me. That's a great starting point and a foundation that we can build on. And I think, I think what Jachesh said, which is like really just engaging, you know. there's nothing more than our aunties and uncles in our community and our, love more than when we see other people from outside the community just trying to engage, even if you get it wrong.
Mm.
You make a bit of a fool of yourself. That's actually incredibly endearing. It's actually when there's a refusal to acknowledge and actually, um, just like a stubbornness, that's when people start to
Mm.
get offended. But if you come in and you say something wrong but you're trying, and then everyone's more than happy to help correct you and also show you different types of food, how to eat it. And honestly, at this point too, to say that I've never heard of something or have no idea of where to even begin is a bit of an excuse that is outdated because there is actually so much content out there and so many speakers, so many educators that are out there that are willing and putting that information out for free. Daniel Day Kim just came out with a new show, K Everything on CNN. And that show is excellent. It's 4 episodes and it really dives deep into the history and of Korean culture. And so if you want to find it, you can definitely do so.
And I love the way that you frame with integrity, but it's an honesty and a curiosity. It's a humbleness that you could, is anyone can show up as long as they're there to learn, to genuinely want to be there and support. That openness comes with a humility that you don't know everything. And that I think is what drives everybody to want build bridges, but also learn. I think that's fantastic, that outlook. And I love that. I'm going to keep coming back to that, that this, in a way can inform the rest of the year, that what we learn becomes a lens through which we see other things. Um, I think that's fantastic. I want to push a little bit toward some of the stories that other people tell and how we individually can help um, encourage that humility and a desire to learn by telling our own stories and not just sort of the stand on a stage like you as professional speakers. You're trained to do that, but in other ways that the average everyday person working in office who wants to take this opportunity to share a little bit about their culture, or someone going into classes and looking around and not seeing anyone else like them in their class. What are some of the tips and the ways that you can encourage people, not that stand on a soapbox way of I want to tell you my story, but to share their stories? And in a way, sharing our personal stories lets people look into our lives and our histories and our backgrounds. What are some ways that you think might be easily accessible to someone who isn't looking to just run programs, but that feels, the value in sharing their culture in an environment like an office or others that might not be structured for that sharing of their story, but can be restructured to allow for it in an easy way? Are there any tips or words of wisdom you might give for someone that wants to be able to share, especially in this month, a little bit of pride of their story? And Sam, we could start with you and then go back around to the chess. It doesn't have to be a big, grandiose thing, but maybe small ways that we don't necessarily think of that you've seen are successful.
Yeah, I think leaders are not just the people that are at the top of the food chain. I think everybody has to view themselves in any company, any organization, you all have to view yourself as a leader and a first mover. And so, just having an ally speak up, especially when there's not a great deal of representation in any sort of space, having someone who is an ally and wants to support and is like gently encouraging, I think is probably the best way to do it. And just creating the space by being curious, like just being genuinely curious and be like, hey, I'd love to hear your story, right? And when you build that connection, it's like, hey, like, can we go grab a meal? Like I noticed that you are always eating Korean food. I've never tried it before. Like I would love, to grab a meal with you sometime, if you feel comfortable, right? And just that genuine authenticity can really but breaking a bread can really cause a lot of healing. And I remember, I'll tell this quick story, is like during Clubhouse, I used to host these rooms where we just talked about our Asian American story. And that room was packed for hours, day after day. And I just remember so many Asian Americans would come in and be like, this is the first time I've ever been able to tell my story. And I've never felt like anybody cared to hear it.
Mm.
But the second someone shows any degree of interest, that can just really unlock a whole bunch of storytelling that you never imagined. And people are like onions. There's so much more to us than meets the eye, and we just have to be genuinely curious to find out.
Love that. Thanks, Sam. That was a great question, David. And being a storyteller, it's very, very relevant to how I approach this. One thing that happens, and I'll speak for immigrants especially, that within corporate settings, within academic settings, Asian Americans often will self-exclude them from conversations. And this is not to say that their uh, feeling of being marginalized is imaginary. They have been marginalized in the past, but today often Asian Americans, when they move into corporate settings, move into like mainstream offices and education centers and campuses, they will often not volunteer their own stories because they think that oh, like I don't want to take up space or nobody else will relate to me. Let's talk about Christmas because everybody, knows to talk about Christmas. Let me not talk about Diwali. Let me not talk about this very niche festival that only people in my little village back home celebrate. And this self-exclusion kind of it it is obviously does damage to the people, to the immigrants themselves, but it also robs everybody else of this richer experience that could have been. So the first thing I teach people in my storytelling experience, in my storytelling workshops, is volunteer, take up space, talk to people. And the motivation isn't, oh, you might make an impression or it'll help you in your career. All of this is true, it will. But the motivation is that people want to know, people want to hear, people are so curious. Once you start talking about yourself, once you start sharing your stories that are very, very particular to you, peculiar to where you come from, the time and space, people actually want to know more. You will get follow-up questions. People will reference back to those stories when they come together. So the first thing to do is to remind ourselves and each other is that I deserve a seat at the table and I don't have to earn that seat. I don't have to deserve it. I don't have to earn it. I don't have to make special, I don't have to wedge my way into it. The space is here. When people get together in a break room, by the water cooler, I'm not going to self-exclude myself. I'm not going to only talk about things that I think is relevant and relatable to everybody. I will bring in my stories from my experience, and I'm going to trust the listener that they will show interest and that they want to know more.
I love that. Don't be afraid to take up space. That especially in this month, maybe this is an opportunity to start taking up space as a habit for the rest of the year in a way that is honest and genuine and inviting to others to share that space with you. And Sam, I know, and I know you've written about it, and I also agree with you. I think food is such a gateway to culture. It can be a bit hackneyed where if we're doing something, as a on a college campus and they're studying celebrating AAPI month, they're gonna have a table with every dish, and like it can be a bit hokey that way, or maybe in the break room at a company we only, do it that way. But if it's used as a gateway, as opposed to the end, if it's used as because I think food and family are universal and they are such a great way as a lens to look at other people's stories. And I know you've really looked, Sam, you've pulled that thread so well in terms of both of those, food and family, with what you've written about in the past with your mother, that those two are so intertwined. Um, that, how do you think we could use that as a vehicle to open up more space for more stories and more people talking about, that it's that comfort dish that every culture has. It's you and it's home and it's mom and it's all of those pieces of it. But that's your particular flavor of it, and it then sets the scene to your story. And I think, I know you've done that well, and I think it's a universal that helps people identify and connect in such a powerful way. Um, and so, I want to shift a little bit into um, for you brought up this idea of allyship and how do we invite allies might be a great way. Invite allies both individually as well as structurally. So it might be the individual that you were talking about, Sam, that that is an advocate at a tough time or especially a not tough time, but it's also structural allies. That how do we structure in this alliance to make sure that people are always comfortable to take up space? As Jitesh was saying, are there any ideas that you could bring forward of how you would like to receive? Again, in our maybe it's a community, maybe it's within a workplace, maybe it's from your experiences on college campus or within schools, a way that you could see that, hey, a structure of allyship would have helped me in these ways. Or I would have, in my community at the, I would really receive that structure of allyship in a way that's powerful and positive and invites me to take up space fully. Are there any ways that you could see that as a consumer of this, that others could learn on how they could serve you better? And either of you could jump in and start if there are ways that, again, as a consumer, you could see the individual, but also a structure of allyship that would empower you this and the rest of the 11 months.
Yeah, this is I think the challenge is there's actually not a very there's not a perfect answer for this. Um, because every individual is different and the way that where they are in their individual journey is so drastically different. I think, for myself, even like the way I would have received it a few years ago as opposed to now is changed a lot. And that's just I think it's my growth and development as an individual, my identity, and who I understand myself to be. When I was growing up, the thought of bringing Korean food to school was mortifying,
Mm.
right? And because we got relentlessly bullied for it. But now those same, friends who would have bullied me for it are now, you know, blowing up my phone, begging me for help getting into one of the top Korean restaurants in New York City, right? And they're like, "Hey, what do I order? I got the kalbi last time, but then, I want to get, and so it's some people would respond to that as, wow, like that's we've come such a long way where we're being asked these questions and people are taking initiative to ask. Other people would still be hurt. And so I don't think it would be appropriate for me to say that there's actually one way to do this. I think everybody is different, but again, David, I think you actually brought up a really good point earlier, which was when if you put out the entire buffet of Asian American food, right, and Asian cultural food, and then it just stops there and then it's gone, then that is not great, right? But maybe it's just you're spreading it out, right? And you're not trying to do all of it at once, and you're just doing one at a time and really taking the intentionality to really do it right. One, Asian food is very intentionally made, so it's going to be healthy for you. There is a purpose for each component to what is made, and kimchi is great probiotics. And so I think it's really, instead of thinking and trying to condense it, it's really just how do we actually just do things intentionally and fit it in? And again, not trying to get everything inch perfect right. You're not going to make everybody happy. And, there's just going to be some people that really like it and some people that really hate it. And you're just going to have to accept it and say, I'm just going to do my best and be intentional and listen. And that's really the best you can do. But I've come around to this. I really don't think that there's any one particular or perfect way to answer that question.
Fair.
Yeah.
Jitesh, how could they do better for you as a consumer of this?
Yeah, a couple of points here, and I love that the discussion is branching out in so many areas. One is that talk about allyship that you first addressed. And I agree with Sam, like even for me, the way I want it to be advocated for has changed over the years. And I think same for Asian Americans as a group. I don't think from my observation, Asian Americans are really looking for someone to allies to speak for them. Uh, we are not voiceless. We are very much capable of putting ahead our own priorities and expressing those and articulating that. I think where we need allyship is on an institutional level. We need allyship not in a they are quiet, let me speak for them, but in a let me advocate for more Asian American speakers to come in. Let me advocate for Asian Americans on the policy level. Let me talk about Asian American history to be a part of the curriculum in schools. I'm in Chicago, by all accounts, a multicultural city, one of the greatest cities in America. Asian American curriculum in CPS, Chicago Public Schools, less than 10 years old. Like 5 years ago, it got kind of like included in the through the Teach Act. And I think those are the allyships we are looking for now on a policy level, on an institutional level, and not on an individual level, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Second, with about food, I agree with everything that Sam said. The point isn't one food to be taken as an end point of entry and not this is the whole thing. We got together once a month, we ate each other's food, and now we can feel good about ourselves, which is great. But I think it also becomes like a low-hanging fruit. Is that, and then what? Because we don't want to limit entire cultures into a like a customer base. We don't want to reduce it into a product, into a packaged product. We want to talk about just like food and music are part of the Asian American experience, so is being born perhaps multilingual, bilingual. That is also an Asian American experience. When do we touch upon that? When do we include those experiences within our gatherings and meetings? So I think food is an excellent way to get that entry point, but I think then the point is to then expand, to have those conversations while you're enjoying kimchi, for example, which I love.
And
Imagine putting kimchi with, I actually thought about this like with like curry, right? And like goat meat and that like that flavor profile with with the roti, like that'd be so good.
Yeah.
kimchi samosas.
Kimchi samosas. Oh my God.
Right, right.
Uh,
I think no, and I think look, it's back to college programming days that you get food gets butts and seats, right? It gets them in the room. But the bigger question is, all right, now what? They're in the room. Now what? Right? So I think those are great questions. I love Jitesh how you bring up the idea of representation on stage. Asian American speakers shouldn't be just speaking about Asian American experience or Asian American related topics. They can and have an authority. Sam has an authority to talk about the model minority myth, and like there is expertise, both lived and research, that inform that conversation. But he also has expertise on entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship and leadership. That instead of looking at representation on stage has great value all throughout the year and not just bracketed into a month. And so I love that you bring that up as a way of, continuing the conversation beyond just this month. And, especially for, universities that do programming, May isn't the biggest programming month. And so you would be doing a disservice by just bracketing programming of Asian American speakers in that month. So looking at broadening it out.
Yeah, and I just want to
Yeah.
expand on the point, David, a little bit, which is especially with the explosion of, interest in Asian American culture, especially in the youth, right? You look at, hip hop culture is much greatly informed by anime, and and I think people don't realize like Bollywood stars are not just a big, like massive stars in India. They are, if you look at their size of following, they go toe to toe, if not surpass every other major star, around the world. And so you are really limiting your students' ability to be the best version of themselves by not pushing them and encouraging them to expand the horizons of what their understanding of the world is.
Mhm.
And so that, I know we have kind of gotten into this weird space in the United States where, diversity has become this kind of boogeyman word, but it shouldn't be something that is feared, but rather it should be embraced because it's just basic logic. If you limit yourself to a certain degree of information, and that's the only amount of information you hold on to, you certainly will limit your creativity and ability to be able to imagine greater possibilities. But if you expose yourself to different ideas, different opinions, different trains of thought, this is not just, I'm not even just talking about like, race and that's, I'm just literally just talking about different ideas across the board. If you're not exposing yourself to that, then, what are you doing as an educator to to your students? And you're not giving them a chance to become the best version of themselves. And so by opening it up outside of just May and really opening up throughout the entire course of the school year, you're giving your students the best chance to be the best version of who they can be.
And outside of education in our corporate spheres. whether it's a military unit cohesion or it's the team aspect within a division of a company. The idea, you can talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as the words that are used as buzzwords, but you could also just throw all that aside and say, how do we work better together as a team? How do we allow everyone to feel and be able to bring their best work into this team? And how do we as a group accomplish more? And everyone being a part of that. So, regardless of a buzzword, just the end result of again, a military unit or a division of a company being able to pull the best out of everyone that is there to be able to serve whatever market that might be and broaden that market so you could serve more and serve better. I mean, it's outcome based rather than anything about a buzzword. And when we lose sight of that outcome and the impact on our team members because of buzzwords or anything else, we're disservicing both our clients and our team members. And we might as well bring this up because Sam, I think one of the things that you've been able to do, whether it's with the Asian American Foundation or with 1587, is weave identity more seamlessly and not highlight it as just like a tokenism, but really weave seamlessly individual identity with culture and with American culture and how that bleeds into how people show up honestly and whose they are. And you did, by the way, forget to mention K-pop in the influence, and that I know through my kids especially is huge, not just anime. But so talk a little bit about the work that you've done, bridging that gap, if you would, through culture and identity and people being able to be really comfortable who they are in all spaces and the value of them doing that. So if you could talk a little bit about that first.
Sure. Yeah. I just want to also shout out, Jitesh brought up the Teach Act, and TAF had a large role in getting that passed in the legislature. And
Mm.
so it's work that we've been really, supporting along or across the country. But, I started 1587, which is my sneaker brand. We're the first Asian American sneaker brand. And the reason why we started it was my business partner who had been in the sneaker industry for 20 years kept on hearing over and over again in marketing meetings that Asian Americans were not a community that is worth marketing to because we're just a follower consumer. Although the data completely rejected that false notion because we over-indexed by nearly 15% of all sneaker sales, even though at the time we were 7, 8, 9% of the US population. So the numbers don't back up the fact that, we are just a community that you should be overlooking. And so we decided that we were going to, in a very, oversaturated market that is dominated by giants, right? We said we're going to be unapologetically Asian American and that it is going to work. And everybody told us we're stupid. Well, we still ended up on Shark Tank somehow. So these idiots ended up on Shark Tank and we're still alive and doing really well today. So, I think the biggest thing, that we've learned from it is that we do not have to shy about who we are in our cultures. And, when you actually give people a chance to engage and you do so in a way that is authentic, and real, that's really what people are looking for these days. And, the best stories that I hear are when young teenagers or parents of students will come up to me and say that their kids were wearing our sneakers to school and their other non-Asian friends were like, yo, what are those kicks, like, oh, where'd you get those, like, and they're, oh, let me tell you about this brand. Oh, did you know that the first Asian stepped foot in North America in 1587? Like, whoa, and like, and that, like, that is why we do this, right? And we can never sell another sneaker again. I heard that story just at least one time in my life. I feel like we succeeded. And I think, when it comes to breaking through all the noise, especially with social media and the way that, so many businesses are really trying to get off the ground, you have to be very clear about who you are and extremely authentic. And if you're able to do that and you say it with your full chest and you say it with conviction, you'll be amazed at what you're able to build and create. And so my encouragement to everybody is, regardless of whether you're Asian or, what your ethnic background is, celebrate yourself, celebrate your culture, but do it unapologetically. And you should never, ever, ever make yourself smaller because somebody else told you to. If you do, that's as much as it's on them, it's also on you. And there has to be some degree of accountability. It's like, I chose not to tell my story just because someone else told me to make myself small.
That's a perfect setup for what I'm about to ask Jitesh. That's amazing. I mean, he is a master storyteller and teacher of story. So like this is literally his zone of genius and a genius among geniuses. And so turning this also specifically to AAPI month for someone that's going into their office, someone that's going into, their military unit, they're going into school. I know you not just tell great stories, but you also teach the art of it. And so, Jitesh, I want just a couple easy tips for someone to think about in terms of their a skill set that they can build, that you're going to give a few tips that they can walk into that space and really feel confident being unapologetic, even if they have an accent or their food that they brought to lunch the table is different, or a few tips that you could give to anyone listening that wants to be a part of, especially this opportunity in this month, to be able to celebrate by maybe just telling a little bit of their story. Since you're such, you teach this, maybe a few of those 101 tips that anyone can bring with them into a space where they now want to not apologize. They're not shying away from taking up space, and they're going to take that opportunity. Give them the tips.
Absolutely. So the 101 that I also discuss in the workshops, like you said, David, are um, first things first is people. I can fully empathize with folks sitting in a corporate setting, military setting, on a campus, and thinking about like, oh my God, like how do I even start telling a story? Like how do I just bust into like this is not an open mic, nobody's like looking at me. How do I like make space for myself? How do I wedge in? And I don't have anything to share. I don't think I have an interesting life. These are the common things I hear. I train a lot of scientists often to talk about their stories. And especially in the STEM fields, especially in any technical field, we have been trained so much that your product, your process, your innovation should do the talking, and the person who made it should be all the way behind. You should not talk about yourself. Talking about yourself is narcissistic. Even Asian Americans, by the way, we grew up often being told, "Don't talk about yourself. Don't take too much space. It's impolite to talk about yourself.
Mm.
Talk about what you created, right?" Sam would be maybe like, "Okay, talk about the sneaker, but don't talk about Sam. Don't talk about your partner." And storytelling flips that on its head. Storytelling says people will have a better appreciation of what you create if they get to know a little bit about who is the person that this idea flows from. Who is this person that this product originates from? That is what the role of the storytelling is to convince people that not only talking about yourself is not narcissistic, it is what connects people to each other. Otherwise, it's just products connecting with each other. It's just a Amazon warehouse without people's stories, right? And what we want to do is give people some tips on how do you even get started. Um, I start this by differentiating between an anecdote and a story. An anecdote is one of my favorite artists is Frida Kahlo. I was in Arizona once in Phoenix. There was an exhibition of Frida Kahlo's work. I ran there knowing that they were displaying her work live in the flesh. I was this close to my hero's work. It was so cool. Cool story, bro. Has no impact, didn't convince me to pick up a brush, didn't make me an artist overnight. That's an anecdote. That's good to know. A story is where there is an emotional trajectory. You can easily point out the before and the after. You don't have to physically change, but it could be possible, but it perhaps your change in outlook, a change in belief system, a change in circumstances. So think to yourself first, what are the some of the crucial moments in my life that I can point to a before and an after? Who was David before that tragedy happened to him, and after that? What did he learn? Maybe he overcame that, maybe he succumbed to it, but he for sure changed. He was not the same David as before, right? Maybe after the birth of a child, maybe after immigration. So I kind of encourage people to think about moments where you can point out to yourself an emotional trajectory of sorts. There is something there. That's a story because people love transformations. We want to see transformation. That is what kind of like we are waiting for when somebody's telling a story and they're not getting to a point. We're like, okay, what is the point? What they're looking for is when do you change and what did you change into? That is what people are impatient for. So all of us, regardless if you're an immigrant, you were born here, what kind of Asian you identify as, what kind of human you identify as, think to yourself, are there moments of transformation in my life? Because that's what people want. People love hearing stories where there's a before and after. So I encourage folks to first kind of like take stock of their own memories. And if there's a doubt, oh, I don't have a good story. I don't. If you have been alive in the last 5 years on this earth, you have a story to tell. So if you're in your 20s, in your 30s, in your 40s onwards, you have no excuses. Look for the moment of transformation and believe that people are dying to hear that.
That's great advice. Great advice. And I love the idea of equipping people with just the skill sets and a framework of understanding how they can share their story. And in many ways, that big part of opening up to let people understand who they are and see, be seen. And that encouragement that we are all worthy of being seen. And none of us need to take the back seat to our work or something we've accomplished, but that we ourselves as individuals have enough value to take up that space. As we draw toward a close, again, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. And I want to leave each of you the opportunity to say, if you were shaping, how people really approach this month. We've talked a few things already about how this should do almost it's like the idea of that this is a new January. It's the beginning of a year in which we are using some of the things that we've learned or experiences that we felt through the rest of the year to change. And that AAPI month really should be an opportunity for growth and like that transformation you talk about in your story. But if I were giving you that sort of magic wand where you could decide how all programming is done and how celebration happen to celebrate this AAPI month, what's maybe one theme, one idea, one lesson that we want the programmers, the people that running things to have in front of mind so that they can do a better job for more people, a better job for more people. I want to close with giving the opportunity to share that one idea that you might leave others with and how they could do just a little bit better this year than they did last year to set up a better year coming. So Sam and then Jitesh, I'll let you close us out with this idea.
Yeah, I think we've hinted at it pretty much throughout the entire time, but think outside of just the month of May. Programming should be year round. You're doing yourself a much bigger favor. It's going to be much less of a lift than trying to squeeze everything in. And if you actually, plan it in and, let's say like for Korean community, like Chuseok is in the fall, right? Like, it's our Thanksgiving, it's like it's such a beautiful way to celebrate. And so my big thing is think outside of the parameters of which we have defined API Heritage Month. It is not just celebration during one month, but throughout the entire year. Give yourself that space to do so, and bringing in experts is a good way to also start. Obviously, Campus Speak and Evergreen has spent years, building up the roster intentionally, and so I could listen to Chesh speak all day, and so like bring him in, you know, call to the bullpen, bring him in and let the man cook. So yeah, I think it's just that and David, I think you talked about this earlier too. Is like we aren't just Asian Americans, but we are leaders and experts in fields across the board. I'm very proud of the work that I've done in government, in entrepreneurship. Social media, been able to, been recognized, but also extremely proud of our community and like some of the greatest leaders and people that are the most biggest innovators that are happening in the United States right now are Asian American. And we are changing the world as we know it. And so broaden your horizon of who we are and how you frame us will be a great benefit to any organization that you are leading.
That is so well put, man. Oh my God. I think the one thing that I want to kind of I'm desperate to talk about is, and I want to leave everyone with that, is just the idea of non-linear thinking, non-linear innovations and solutions that so many corporates, so many campuses are really obsessed with. How do we break through the systems that we have to come up with innovations and solutions that are outside of the box? And I'm trying to point to them like they are already there. They are in-house. Look at your people. Aren't you curious? Aren't you wondering what do people who have a very completely different lives, who have different upbringings than you, uh, what might they bring in, right? I'm an immigrant. I have lived in two different continents. English is my fourth language. I process things differently. I'm not better than anybody. I can bring in a different perspective. And you
Hmm.
all have Asian Americans employed in your companies, in your on your faculty. Wouldn't you be curious on what kind of non-linear thinking they bring in? I think it's just a different kind of experience that Asian Americans bring that is being untapped right now. DEI has become a little bit of a scary term right now. And I will say, yeah, sure, like forget about DEI, forget about diversity, inclusion. Think of it in a way that I have a problem in front of me that I want solutions for. How do I tap into the resources that I already have, the people that I already have, who may teach me something that I might not be familiar with? I might be familiar with a way of thinking, but there are people in my organization, on my campus, in my faculty that have such a different, richer experience, life lived experience that I don't have access to. Let me bring them in and see what happens. This is what happened when we started having bringing women into the workforce, right? And people are like, "Oh my God, okay, there are so many different ways to go about leadership." Because women brought that in the 50s onwards. It's the same thing with Asian Americans, immigrants, and US born. We just have a different lived experience, and
Sure.
that translates into novel solutions. So don't sleep on that. Tap into those resources. Even speakers, right? Like Sam and I, we are not better than other speakers, but we are just different. We bring in a lived experience that um, you could you could narrate my keynote word for word, but it just wouldn't have the same effect. I bring in a different affect. So don't sleep on the population that you already have. And this is not just for Asian Americans. This is America wide. So yeah.
Yeah, I love it. There's only one thing you said that I can't agree with. You guys are better speakers. Like that's just you are, and we would love if anyone wants to. We'd love to support your communities by helping you bring either or both sometime very soon. Thanks so much for being here and being a part of this conversation, and for Jitesh and Sam for being really integral in helping us to see things from a different perspective and learn and grow by those perspectives. We will have more of these conversations and be excited to have you join them as well. But in the meantime, thank you so much. Enjoy this celebration in May.